Nkrumah continues. My intention was to make my announcement to the assembly at midday, the same time as the news will be broadcast in the United Kingdom. And viewers, I'll explain in a little bit what this meant. The letter that Nkrumah got from the governor, it was a dispatch from the Secretary of State, a letter written to the governor that the governor then forwarded to him, which is for the attention of the speaker. I'll explain in some detail what that was. All right. So it says that my intention was to make the announcement at the assembly at midday, the same time as the news was being broadcast in the United Kingdom. I had previously arranged with the speaker that since I had an important announcement to make, he, the speaker, would permit me to take the floor as soon as I stood up. I was so anxiously watching the minutes pass between 11:30 and midday that I took no interest in the debate that was going on. I like the honesty of the Prime Minister. A bit of Nkrumah looks like Akufo-Addo to me, a little bit. The kind of honesty. He says that he wasn't paying attention to the thing they were saying. This is the Prime Minister, and normally he should pay attention to everything. But he says in the book that, look, I wasn't listening, no, I was waiting for my independence announcement. Very, very, very interesting book, and all students should get it. Get that book so that it goes to Samia Nkrumah can get them, and it goes to PANAF and Samia Nkrumah get. Buy that book, Nkrumah's autobiography. You have to get it. It's amazing. And if you don't have enough, PANAF are printing it. So if Samia Nkrumah is listening, tell her that we want more of her father's biography. All right. He says, I was so anxiously watching the minutes pass between 11:30 and midday that I took no interest in the debate that was going on. I was so keyed up that I simply didn't know how to contain myself, he says. As soon as the hands of the clock reached 12, I stood up. The speaker interrupted the discussion. There was dead silence in the house, and members looked up expecting me to raise some point of order or to contribute something to the matter being debated. Before I spoke, I looked at my watch. It was 3 minutes past 12. I took a deep breath and prepared myself for the most triumphant moment of my life. Quote, he begins, Mr. Speaker, I said, with your permission, I should like to make a statement. With effect from midday today, the publication of 2 dispatches of vital importance to the future of our country has been authorized. I paused for the cheers to die down. Then he continued. I continued, Otsajefo speaks. The dispatch from the governor at the request of my government to the Secretary of State, asking him to declare a firm date for the attainment of independence by the Gold Coast, and the Secretary of State's dispatch in reply thereto. Copies of these 2 dispatches will be distributed to honorable members as soon as the House rises today. I then proceeded to read the statement from the Secretary of State. In this dispatch, the Secretary of State, recalling his statements in the House of Commons on 11th May, noted that a general election had now been held, that the Convention People's Party had been returned to power with a majority of over 2/3, and that the motion for independence has been passed in the newly elected assembly by 72 members to none. The opposition members having absented themselves from the debate, the whole of the assembly was for a few seconds dumbfounded. Then, all at once, the almost sacred silence was broken by an ear-splitting cheer. Cheers that must have been unprecedented in the assembly. Some were too deeply moved to control their tears. Among them, some of my closest associates, those who had really felt the brunt of the battle and who perhaps realized more forcibly the true meaning of the word victory. I then continued and read to the House the Secretary of State's reference to the Trust Territory of Togoland and the plebiscite that was conducted there, which had resulted in a clear majority vote in favor of union with an independent Gold Coast. The Trusteeship Council of the United Nations passed a resolution in July noting that the will of the majority of the inhabitants was for a union with independent Gold Coast, and recommending that steps should be taken for the trusteeship agreements to be terminated upon the attainment of independence by the Gold Coast. Now, let me just say something here. So this is sort of buttressing the point that 1957, 6th of March, was not a dramatic date. It was a date that was expected. It was a date that was planned. So because even the plebiscites that occurred for Trans-Volta Togoland, for Volta region to be part of Ghana, That plebiscite was done on the basis that, do you want to join independent Gold Coast or do you want to remain as a trans territory? Now, at the time the question was put, Gold Coast was not independent, if you look at the documents, because Gold Coast independence is March 1957. But because the British Parliament had accepted the independence of the Gold Coast and were only lining up a timetable, which we will show you today. We'll show you the timetable of the British Parliament today on this screen. Because of that, they knew that Gold Coast was going to be independent. So what happened on 5 March and 6 March was not dramatic. It was largely expected. And that's not when independence was won. That was only the day of the commemoration of the independence. That's a symbolic day that things are handed over. That's not the day that so it's like the president wins the election on the 7th of December. He's sworn in on 7th January. He didn't win the election on 7th January. He won the election on 7th December. By the time he was going for the election on 7th December, he knew that if he wins, he'll be sworn in on 7th January. Very similar to that situation. So independence was not won on 6th of March 1957. The commemoration of independence was done on 6th of March 1957. Independence was truly won the day the British Parliament passed it. That was September 1956. Let's get some more details. Okay. So the agreement was terminated, provided that this solution is endorsed by the General Assembly of the United Nations. Appropriate action will be taken to include the territory of British Togoland within independent Gold Coast. Nkrumah continues. Cheers greeted the deputy leader of the opposition as he stood and welcomed the statement on behalf of the opposition. This is an interesting part of the history as well. We have been told that some people didn't want independence and all. This is Nkrumah on the day announcing that the dispatch from the Secretary of State has come. And the deputy leader of the opposition he talks about is S.D. Dombo. S.D. Dombo, the man whose name is on his name is on one of the schools. Tonight we're doing independence, so I won't go there, don't worry. But S.D. Dombo, whose name you'll be hearing these days, Dankwabuzia Dombo tradition, that's the one Nkrumah is referring to. He is the one who rose up, the deputy leader of the opposition, as he stood and welcomed the statement on behalf of the opposition. S.D. Dombo it was. All right, let's move on. Then the whole assembly went wild with excitement. I was suddenly whisked off my feet and carried shoulder high into the street where the masses were jubilating, singing, and dancing to the strains of the party song, There is Victory for Us. Congratulations poured in by telephone, telegram, cable, and letter, to say nothing of the hundreds of personal callers. It was a wonderful feeling to know that the thousands of people from all corners of the world were rejoicing in our great victory. I thought that it would be a nice gesture if I and my ministers paid an informal visit to the governor to share with him the victory that he had helped us so much to secure. At 5:30 that afternoon, therefore, we all went to the castle where the governor was waiting to receive us. It was a most happy occasion. All right. The whole country was celebrating. That evening, a friend of mine arrived from Kumasi and excitedly related to me how the news had been received there. Kwame, he said, you should really have been there. As sure as I'm standing here, Kwame, the supporters of the NLM were more wild with excitement than even the CPPists. It's another interesting account in Nkrumah's biography. It is reported to Nkrumah by one of his friends, he doesn't mention his name, that the supporters of the National Liberation Movement, Ochere Akoto and his group, Dr. Usefri Akoto's father, Ochere Akoto and his group, who were supporting the NLM, when they heard that the colonial secretary had agreed on independence, they went wild with jubilation in Kumasi. That's not what we have heard, have we? All right, but this is Nkrumah writing. He says, many of them, not content with a single freedom salute, raised both hands in the air as they yelled, freedom. What a day it had been. How could anybody have wished for a more wonderful way of celebrating one's birthday? Let's move on. On the following day, now he says, on the following day, 19 September, I made a further statement to the House. I pointed out that with the promise of our independence on the 6th, so please viewers, look at the words Nkrumah used. He said, I pointed out to the House that with the promise of our independence on the 6th of March 1957, the last phase of our struggle had been reached. It was a promise. Independence was promised because the British House of Commons had passed it. And we had chosen 6th of March. But of course, between then and when the 6th of March happens, you really don't know what will happen. It's like the example I'm giving. President wins elections in December. Between then and January, you really don't know what will happen. But we all expect that on 7th January, the president, the declared winner of the election, will be sworn in. So that's how Nkrumah, that's the West Nkrumah used. A promise of our independence on 6th of March, the last phase of our struggle had been reached. We have reason, Mr. Speaker, this is Nkrumah speaking, to be proud as well as thankful that this historic declaration has at last been made, I said. And I was happy to hear the assurance given yesterday by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition that the opposition welcomed the Secretary of State's announcement. On the 113th anniversary of the bond of 1844, that's the point I was making about 6th March. It's compared to 1844, and Dankwa provided it. On the 113th anniversary of the bond of 1844, which led to Britain's political domination of the Gold Coast, our country would be free. Since I had dedicated myself to bringing our struggle for independence to an end when I returned home in 1947, I had been heartened by the loyal and loyal support of the people and sustained by the steadfastness and unwavering courage of the Convention People's Party. We were, as the Secretary of State has said, at a turning point in the history of the Gold Coast. I said that the Assembly would wish to know what the government's intentions were at this point. We are determined to play our part in drafting a constitution which will satisfy the genuine aspirations of every lover of freedom. The government proposes that this Assembly shall have ample opportunity to debate and determine our constitution. To this end, the government will, at the earliest practicable opportunity, publish a white paper setting forth the detailed provisions of the proposed constitution. I think that is beautiful and that is fantastic. That is Kwame Nkrumah's account of the events leading up to the Independence Day celebration. This is sometime around the time that the dispatch came in 1956. So we will get to the story about what happened at Independence.